Thank you, Uncle, for that welcome to the great peoples of the Kulin Nations for having us here in this, the oldest continent, the centre of Australia. This will always be Aboriginal land, and there's no unimportant time to remember that, so let's do it more often than at the start of speeches. As Nicole said, I'm going to rehash a bit of what I said at APAM, but obviously you are not a group of international presenters, so hopefully you'll find it relevant. What a fucking year. Yeah, I sort of feel literally transparent with rage when I think of all the willful stupidity that our arts community has been put through, the anxiety and the stress. And now here we are catapulting out on the other side, needing to rebuild and asking what we've learnt. And here today maybe to harness this feeling of fury into resilience and into stability. And I guess first, as Nicole said, we need to take stock of the cost and grieve a little for the important work that has been dismantled by this political idiocy. Our personal sustainability as art makers, the pressure on our working lives that this volatility causes is important to acknowledge. We need to ask ourselves, at what cost do I continue? Where is the line, and why are we here to do this work at this particular moment in history? And we need to ask ourselves this because it is, of course, insane to separate the personal from the political, and we need to find the energy to continue. And it seems to me personally at this moment that in order to answer these questions for myself, that I have a hunger for grand old ideas, and I need to look back to the feelings that drove me when I first decided to be involved in the arts. I need to be reinvigorated by blind and holy idealism and the idea that what we are doing is profoundly meaningful. And I wonder if we are at risk of bitterness, and, I don't want to be just one more art bitch in the foyers of the world talking about how fucked the funding situation is. And I want to fight absolutely for the idea that what we do has simply the worth of any other profession, and that we should not be forced to accept a situation where our work is not valued. So today is about what we do next, and so here is a few thoughts on bringing down the power. So nothing struck me more in the nuclear aftermath of Brandis's decision-making more than my own powerlessness. And of course, we are all at the behest of political whims every day, but this one struck me so much more viscerally, and when I reflect on why, it seems that I had always been thinking or attacking the sustainability of Aphids as an organisation as a problem that could be solved with my ingenious strategy, that if I just found the right balance, the right algorithm of private and public support, we'd be able to support our artists, our managers, and create the art we thought necessary, and this would be validated by audiences or not, but that ultimately there was going to be a solution. And that what the last few months has shown to me is that the problem of sustainability in the arts is a broader problem about how we value culture, that as an individual arts organisation, as artists alone, we cannot solve it, that it's systemic, and that we are still at the point in our cultural conversation where we are actually talking about whether art has value or not. And for those of us in this room, that is so ludicrous that it just makes us want to vomit. But in a way, it's analogous to the feminist dialogue where the world said, yeah, didn't we solve that in the 70s? And then, we woke up in the 21st century and we still didn't have equality, and we had to start that conversation again. or it runs concurrently to how we value our First Peoples and how we elevate their cultural knowledge here. And it's not that it doesn't happen, and of course these events of the last few months have brought out the best in us, the people who are on our side, the masses of audiences who care, but it's that it's not an ingrained fundamental necessity that we value culture as an Australian community, that we don't strive to preserve it. We wouldn't dare speak of it in the same breath as health and education. And so that's where it should be, and I feel like that's the place that, I need to idealistically look towards. So, after we get over the shock of, oh my God, we are still having this conversation in this moment in history, it's galvanising that there's strength in knowing our position, in seeing ourselves in the arts as one thing, a community, an octopus of a thing, but a thing no less together. And I was asked by Nicole to rehash what I said at APAM for you, those of you who weren't there. And I think maybe it struck a chord simply because it was, about talking about the elephant in the room, that we as the artists, the small to mediums, the makers, the producers, the sellers of art, we are not the ones with power. It is the presenters, the funding bodies, the buyers who have it. And it is always the privilege of power to determine the terms of the conversation that we have. And the point is that we want to turn the tables as the sector that employs more people than mining, that contributes this much to the DP and this much to mental health and this much to just being alive. We need to be naming the elephant in the room, pointing out the value of what we do, and we need to be more demanding because we can no longer take it for granted that we are needed. And we want in this room, I think, to build collaborative models with each other, with funding bodies, with presenters. We want to move beyond hierarchical constructs to genuine exchange. And so we have to be exacting about the influence of what is unsaid in the room. So, number one, I think we have to insist to the people in power that it is their responsibility to account for their actions. Often our relationship with those in power in the arts is built on flattery. We have to be coy with them and pretend we are not seeking an opportunity, and instead we should be demanding their transparency. How are they letting us dictate the terms of engagement? In what way will the relationship between us be equal? How will they continue over the course of our relationship to have direct and meaningful contact with us despite all the competing other priorities? One of the most important questions of our century will be how to maintain meaningful communication with each other. How do we value each other's time? And the last few months have been nothing if not an insult to the value of our time as arts workers. In the deluge of methods of sharing, how do we nurture and make time for fragile conversations, the ones that benefit from full and ongoing attention, and how do we structure ourselves to make this possible? Number two, for artists, for presenters, for those on both sides, and to use a wealth management term which conjures the image of executives munching on baby dolphins, what is our risk appetite? It seems like when we talk about risk, we confuse it with innovation. Innovation, I think we understand here. We all know the moment when we see a work that blows our mind, that is simply unlike anything we've seen before. And we know when we've made one. As presenters, artists, as funding bodies, it's our job to foster innovation. But risk is the real contact with danger, asking the weird question in the room, pushing for clarity, deciding to program something you think might fail but satisfies the need of one important community. Today, sitting down and trying to communicate, really listen to someone you don't really like. Whatever it is, it takes real effort. It's an effort that is aligned with the intention to look at the known form and do something else. There's the potential for embarrassment, for discomfort, and for failure. And what won't we risk? What is so important that it is non-negotiable? 3, let's not forget as a community that it is the political that matters, and let's do it at the same time as believing in art for art's sake. I make very weird large-scale projects about astrophysics, so I am not just saying let's only do issues-based things. But I think on both sides of the artist and the presenter coin, we love to get stuck in high art, low art dichotomies. And right now in Australia, we are in the aftermath of what happens when politicians take these false dichotomies and exploit them. They are dangerous. They ignore the fact of interdependence, and they also ignore the fact that people outside the arts often find the ballet as weird as experimental art. So don't forget to notice how many women are in your program, to acknowledge the full influence on queer culture of how we party, to consider what we are culturally appropriating, to remember who gave us our first jobs when we were just tiny art babies without any experience. Let's not forget our lineages. To whom do we owe the ability to sit in this room, and how do we honour that? If it's more than just a business, which it has to be, because no one here is in it for the money, that is for sure, let's not all be obsessed with the new work, new technologies, new audiences as a response to this situation. At least get rid of the implication that it must be out with old. Newness in our context, when we are all internationally facing the volatility of support for the arts in a world which is literally on the edge of a catastrophic environmental precipice, newness might have to mean something totally other. Committing to not just consuming each other, to raising the stakes to create models that sustain each other over 100 years at least. So I guess, and importantly, and I've been reflecting on this, to return all of us on wherever we sit in the ecosystem to the importance of the artist. I think that deciding to make art is already a radical act, just to be an artist, and that this is true whether you're a landscape painter or making weird space art. And the focus central to our collective work needs to be how do we take care of our artists so they can tell our stories. And not just the artists we know, the ones we don't know, the baby ones who reach out looking for an opportunity, the ones whose work we admire, the ones who are not working in a genre that we like. If the Brandes decision was one thing, it was about class. It was about valuing white middle-class stories and art forms above all others. And we have a responsibility to advocate for the diversity of storytelling. We can't get stuck in our own niches, our cliques, our KPIs. We must be irreproachable in our advocacy for the value of creative expression as a whole, for the importance of the major performing arts organisations as well as the tiny artist-run spaces. So in this next phase, when we proceed bleeding a little, having lost months of valuable time floundering around in uncertainty, how will we structure ourselves? What projects will we choose over others? What will we program? What will we advocate for? And what will we say no to? And I really believe that what we deem to be important in this next phase will determine the arts ecology in the next hundreds of years. So it's time for us to make considered choices for seeking support from each other. And what we are prepared to risk will determine what we value. And what we decide to protect, to preserve, what we pig-headedly and bloody-mindedly say matters, will be the stories that are being heard in the future, just as right now we are still living the stories of genocide, of the slow, unwilling letting go of the patriarchy. And so cultural change, it seems, is evolution at its most painful. And it's the slow mutating of selves to the conditions of the environment, and in the arts we're both the creature and the environment. So I want to be idealistic today, to not make hasty decisions based on job certainty or the need for certainty, and that feels like the most difficult thing right now. But above all, I think I feel hopeful about art, especially Australian art, that internationally it is doing stuff that nobody else in the world is doing. And amongst all the horror, it seems that it is seeping more into the things around us, into us. It's becoming more essential, more simply just part of the world. And this, which is driven by the intelligence of the audience that we are speaking for, by their hunger and their capacity to take on a breadth of storytelling, this is something really to continue to strive for. And there is always room to remember the essential fragility of what we do, and also to just harden the fuck up and do it better, because here we are on the golden crust of opportunity in the world, and the fact is that we are the privileged few who get to decide. So, in summary, a short poem by the great poet, Russian poet Anna Akhmatova, who taught us a lot about pain. Let's drink, maybe later, a lot. Let's drink to our demolished house, to all this wickedness. To you, our loneliness, together I raise a glass. To the cold, dead eyes, to the lie that betrayed us, to the coarse, brutal world, the fact that God has not saved us. Let's drink to hope. Thank you.